Number 16. Gavin Robinson. In early 2023, 31-year-old Maisie Dickinson was enjoying a visit with her partner when someone started throwing rocks at the mother of three's bedroom window in the English town of Seaham. She just assumed that it was some kids misbehaving and decided to brush it off at first, but curiosity eventually prompted her to ask a neighbor if she could see anything through their surveillance footage. Maisie was shocked to discover that the person throwing rocks was not actually a kid, but instead a grown man, and he spent multiple hours lurking outside the home. She posted the video to social media, and the man was almost immediately identified as 28-year-old Gavin Robinson. Despite his frightening and odd behavior, Maisie decided not to report him to the authorities right away, most likely because she was hoping it was only a one-time thing. 3 months later, though, she looked into her message request folder on social media and found dozens of missed calls and messages coming from Robinson dating back to the rock-throwing incident. Robinson called Maisie ugly, and a few other names threatened to ruin her life and hurt her in other ways. He even mocked her partner, Brian, who he knew worked out of town on an oil rig for 3 weeks each month. At first, Maisie didn't realize Robinson was the rock thrower. By the time she figured it out, though, she'd replied to his messages acting confused about who he was, sparking a flurry of hateful responses from the scorned stalker. At the time, Brian was away at work. Terrified for her safety, Maisie chose to pack up the couple's children and went to a close family member's house. Several days later, she saw Robinson loitering near the gate of her children's school building. Upon gaining a closer look at his face, she realized he'd come into her workplace and stared at her a few times in the past. Robinson's stalking only got worse over time. The unwanted calls and messages continued, the threats escalated, and he lurked outside of Maisie's home on a regular basis when he knew Brian was away for work. In one message, he threatened to take an axe to Maisie's head. In another, he said he was going to slice her face open. Still believing that the situation wasn't quite serious enough to inform the police, Maisie changed her family's daily routines, started parking much further away from her house, and even started slipping in and out of the house through her back door, hoping the family would go unnoticed by the stalker. She practically became a prisoner in her own home, but she continued to tolerate the situation until Robinson followed her to work one day and violently tried to open the door, which the employees locked specifically to keep him out. Finally, Maisie called 911, and Robinson was arrested that very same day. In hindsight, she realized that she had every right to call the cops all along and wished she'd contacted them much sooner. Robinson was convicted of stalking involving fear of violence and was sentenced to serve 2.5 years in prison. To this day, Maisie has no idea why he chose to target her, but she now has a lifetime restraining order against him, which means he'll face serious legal trouble if he bothers her after he's released from prison. Number 15. Leah Dipol. In 2021, a 23-year-old British woman named Leah Dipol waged a brutal stalking and harassment campaign against Katie Cooley. Katie was a therapist who treated Leah during her time at a woman's shelter. According to law enforcement, Dipol's obsession with Cooley started shortly after she moved out of the shelter in November of that year. Dipol sent Cooley almost 200 emails spewing vile hatred, including one message calling the victim the B word and telling her to go off and die. She even sent photos of Cooley's head attached to adult performers' bodies to the victim's co-workers. She also sent Cooley topless photos of herself, publicly posted the victim's personal cell phone number, spread baseless rumors about inappropriate activity at the victim's workplace, and accused Cooley of having explicit relationships with the shelter's residents. The harassment continued for 6 weeks until Dipol was arrested. She was convicted of a stalking charge and was handed a 2-year suspended prison sentence. Cooley was so traumatized by the incident that she quit her job, eventually moved and changed her identity. Due to Dipol's false allegations, she lost all respect in the mental health field, giving her no choice but either find a new career or start over as a brand new person in a new place. On top of moving costs, Cooley spent thousands of dollars rebranding her public image. Just a few months after pleading guilty to stalking, Dipol, who now goes by the legal name Daisy Degnan, was arrested for throwing her cell phone at a police officer during a welfare check. Someone called the cops and requested the visit out of a concern for Dipol's mental health, but she apparently didn't need the help. The officer found Dipol at a property near her home where she devolved into a drunken tantrum and forcefully whipped her phone at the cop's head. After being placed in the back of a patrol car, she banged her head against a window and spat on the glass, which had to be professionally cleaned. Despite her erratic behavior and her ever-growing list of criminal convictions, Dipol once again managed to avoid prison time. She pleaded guilty to an assault charge and was ordered to wear an alcohol monitoring bracelet for 4 months, but if she continues along the same path she was on, it definitely won't be too long before she makes headlines again. Number 14. Fatima Gropo. In 2015, while working as a history teacher at a New Jersey Catholic school, 24-year-old Fatima Gropo was accused of having an inappropriate relationship with an underage student. The illicit contact reportedly happened several times over a month-long period at the now-shuttered Cardinal McCarrick High School in South Amboy, which closed for unrelated financial reasons after Gropo's arrest. Authorities launched an investigation into the allegations against Gropo after receiving a tip from a school official. Gropo was arrested on suspicion of assault and endangering the welfare of a child. In April 2016, Gropo pleaded guilty to endangering the welfare of a child and agreed to surrender her teaching certificate and never teach young students again. She was sentenced to serve 3 years of probation and has managed to stay out of the news ever since, indicating that she probably got her act together and moved on with her life. Number 13. Brian Anthony Joe. In early 2021, a peeping Tom fell through the ceiling of a woman's locker room at a gym located in Stafford, Virginia, while watching some members change. Later identified as 41-year-old Brian Anthony Joe, the suspect fell right on top of one of the victims while wearing a harness that he'd been using as part of his elaborate scheme to spy on female gym-goers. He was unable to get himself free from the harness, so he tried unsuccessfully to climb back into the ceiling. He then cut the harness system with a knife and ran straight into the men's locker room. When he tried to leave, he was met with several women who cornered him while an employee called 911. After realizing that he was surrounded with nowhere to run, Joe retreated back into the men's locker room and hid inside a bathroom stall. He was then arrested at the scene on suspicion of burglary, vandalism, and peeping or spying into a building. While searching through the gym, police discovered a rope ladder system in a unisex bathroom that was somehow secured to the toilet with straps and tape. Joe had used the mechanism to access the ceiling area directly above the women's locker room, where investigators saw an elaborate system of straps, hooks, binders, and clips, and a peephole above the showering area. Inside Joe's gym bag, officers found additional straps, zip ties, extra-strong duct tape capable of withstanding several hundred pounds, meth, and personal lubricant. Behind a bathroom door, they spotted a camera, and hidden inside the suspect's pants was a cell phone connected to the camera device. Subsequent searches of Joe's property turned up countless photos and videos of women that were clearly taken without their knowledge or consent, which led to even more charges being brought against the suspect. Prosecutors now had enough evidence to prove that Joe had put a great deal of planning into his perversion. Instead of going to trial, he entered all-for pleas to 2 counts of burglary, 7 peeping charges, and several other crimes. In doing so, he maintained his innocence while admitting that the court probably had a strong enough case to secure a guilty conviction. Joe apologized at his sentencing hearing and asked the court to impose a term within the standard recommended sentencing guidelines, which call for up to 6 months in prison. The court decided to come down much harder, sentencing him to over 52 years with 40 years suspended, amounting to a total of 13 years behind bars. Turns out being a creep costs time. Number 12. Damon Todd White. A Texas woman's life became a living hell after she filed for divorce from her husband, 52-year-old Damon Todd White, back in 2019. Monica Torres obtained an order of protection against her former romantic partner, but that didn't seem to matter to White, who embarked on a years-long terror campaign against the woman. It started off with harassing voicemails and text messages, but soon escalated into car vandalism. According to several court documents, White put styrofoam balls in the gas tank of Monica's car and rendered several of her family's other vehicles completely inoperable. He also broke into Monica's apartment one day in Collin County, where police caught him lurking in a frightening all-black outfit and latex gloves with a knife in his possession. Police grew so concerned for Monica's safety that an officer was stationed outside her home 24/7 to ensure her safety. In early 2021, White pleaded guilty to 5 charges related to his stalking. While handing down a probation sentence, the judge ordered him to wear a GPS monitor at all times, to have no contact with the victim, and to stay out of the city of Allen. Just a few months later, in September 2021, White broke his probation and started contacting Monica's family members with threats to kill his ex. He then cut off his ankle bracelet and was tracked to the city of Allen through his car's GPS, prompting authorities to relocate the victim and her loved ones to a secret location for their own safety. White remained on the run for about a month before he was finally taken down in a multi-agency arrest and hauled off to jail on new charges. He once again pleaded guilty and received a maximum sentence of 20 years. Court records show that White is convicted of 2 counts of stalking, 2 counts of violating a protective order, and 1 count each of burglary and criminal mischief. He became eligible for parole in 2022, but has a projected release date of 2029 and could stay in prison until as late as 2040. Number 11. Nagasi Zabari. In July 2023, a Seattle woman was lured into a helpless situation by a man pretending to be an undercover police officer. The suspect allegedly threatened the victim with a taser device, tied up her wrists and legs, before forcing her into a vehicle. He then drove 450 miles to a residence in Klamath Falls, Oregon, where he locked her inside a homemade cinder block cell in his garage. Determined to escape this life or death situation, the victim repeatedly punched the door, which could only be opened from the outside, until it broke. She then ran for her life, climbing over a 6-foot fence and flagged down a driver for help. Despite being traumatized and unfamiliar with the area, the woman was miraculously able to lead police to the house where she was held captive. Investigators immediately identified the suspect as 29-year-old Nagasi Zabari, who lived at the rental home with his wife and children. He reportedly kept his purpose-built prisoner cell a secret from his family by banning them from going inside the garage. According to law enforcement, Zabari went by several fake names and had moved to the area about 6 months earlier. By the time police officers reached the crime scene, he had packed up his family and ran away. During a search of the property, detectives found a handwritten to-do list that seemed to describe the suspect's ideal kidnapping victim. Titled Operation Takeover, it consisted of a bullet point that read, "Make sure they don't have a bunch of people in their life. You don't want any type of investigation." Investigators also found an odd sketch of an underground bunker that he presumably planned to build for future captives. Zabari was arrested after a brief standoff at a Walmart in Reno. According to the FBI, he has moved frequently throughout the US in recent years and reportedly has a lengthy criminal record. Number 10. Jeffrey Williamson. In 2016, a Twitter user named Canada Creep started posting photographs and videos of women's clothed private areas that were taken in public without their consent. Based on the nature of the illicit material, which included upskirt images of unsuspecting women, it was clear that they didn't know they were being filmed. While many people disapproved of the content for obvious reasons, the account amassed a whopping 17,000 followers in less than a year. After learning about a video of herself that had been secretly filmed in downtown Calgary back in 2017, 22-year-old Alexandra Constantinidis immediately went to the authorities. By the next day, the Canada Creep account had been taken down from the site. But it was way too late for the user to stop the internet from circulating the illegal images that seemed to show his reflection through windows and mirrors in a few of the shots during his voyeuristic missions. Within days of the police report being made, authorities were able to arrest 42-year-old Jeffrey Robert Williamson on multiple charges related to his secretive filming activities. A Calgary police spokesperson credited the overwhelming public response with helping them identify Williamson. A subsequent search of the suspect's electronic devices turned up hundreds of thousands of images that were suspected to be criminal. In September 2018, the suspect pleaded guilty to several crimes, including voyeurism and distribution of voyeurism. He was sentenced to serve 2 years in prison, followed by 2 years of probation, and was banned from owning electronic devices, ever using social media, and going to downtown Calgary. Number 9. Martin Korbel. In April 2023, a 40-year-old Virginia man named Martin Corbell was arrested for trying to break into his ex-girlfriend's home in Stafford County. He'd left the house the night before after getting into a fight with the woman, only to return full of rage and ready for a violent confrontation. When the ex-girlfriend refused to let Corbell inside, he allegedly ordered her to come outside so he could assault her. The victim told police officers that when she refused to go outside, Corbell then flew into a tantrum and tried punching the door down. He was later arrested on suspicion of domestic assault and battery, driving with a revoked license, and trying to break and enter to commit assault with a deadly weapon. A judge issued an emergency restraining order banning him from getting close to his ex, but he showed up at the woman's house anyways just 2 days after posting bail. This time, Corbell allegedly tried breaking the door down with a sledgehammer. When that didn't work, he climbed in through an unlocked window. According to court documents, Corbell then locked all the doors inside the house to stop his ex from escaping. Witnesses later reported overhearing him threatening to kill the woman and others. Deputies rushed to the scene and broke the door down. After entering the house, they reportedly saw Corbell assaulting the victim and had to pull him off of her. The suspect was once again hauled off to jail, where he was booked on charges of breaking and entering, domestic assault and battery, violating a protective order, abduction, driving with a revoked license, as well as 2 counts of destruction of property. As of early 2024, he remains held without bail while awaiting trial on 10 different charges. Number 8. Grant Amato. After losing his job as a nurse and getting kicked out of college back in 2018, 29-year-old Grant Amato started spending all of his time chatting with a Bulgarian webcam model named Silvia Venceslavova, or Sylvie, who charged the young man for her time. When he inevitably ran out of money, he began stealing it from family members who he shared a home with in Seminole County, Florida. Amato grew so obsessed with Sylvie that he spent over $200,000 communicating with her over a several-month span. In addition to the fees that the website charged, he tipped Sylvie hundreds of dollars each chat in a bid to impress her and keep her close. At the time, Amato's family thought that he was trying to pursue a new career as a Twitch streamer. They'd lent him their credit cards to buy streaming equipment and were initially unaware he was instead using the cards to pay for his chats with Sylvie. After discovering his secret obsession, Amato's parents encouraged him to get some mental help. They even spent thousands of dollars sending him to an upscale private rehab facility for people addicted to adult content. Grant quit the program after only a few days, but his father, Chad, allowed him to come home under the condition that he get a job, go to therapy, and maintain zero contact with Sylvie. Days later, Amato's father caught him talking to the cam girl once again and told him to pack his things and leave the home. The next day, Amato went into his parents' house and shot his mother, Margaret, in the head while she sat at her computer desk. He then waited for Chad and his 31-year-old brother, Cody, to get home and shot them both as they entered the house. Before leaving the scene, Amato planted the gun and holster on Cody in an attempt to frame him for his parents' murders. After discovering the family during a welfare check, police tracked Amato down at a local hotel. Through crocodile tears, he pretended to be devastated about the death of his family. But investigators placed him at the crime scene on the day of the triple murder through both phone and computer activity, and he was quickly charged with the murders. According to court documents, Cody Amato had grown so afraid of Grant that he told his girlfriend he was afraid his brother would kill him. Sadly, he was right. Amato maintained his innocence throughout the court proceedings and continues to do so from behind bars, where he's now serving a life sentence for 3 counts of first-degree premeditated murder. Number 7. Thomas McGuigan. Over a several-month period that started in 2022, a young British woman was tormented by a 32-year-old stalker named Thomas McGuigan. Police officers in Nottinghamshire started investigating McGuigan after the victim filed a report that accused him of banging on her front door late at night and making several threats. It wasn't the woman's first run-in with McGuigan either. By the time she complained to law enforcement, the culprit had been intimidating and threatening her for about 3 months. McGuigan allegedly made his threats over social media chats. He claimed that he'd slashed the victim's car tires, had broken into her house, driven into her hedges, and would barrel straight at her in his vehicle on the road. Authorities charged mcgan for his unacceptable behavior. In April 2023, he pleaded guilty to stalking, 2 counts of dangerous driving, and threatening to destroy or damage property. The judge ordered him to a year in jail, banned him from driving for a year, and thankfully granted the victim a 5-year order of protection. Number 6. Lance Beaton. To those who knew her, 53-year-old Danette Webb from Albuquerque, New Mexico, was a shining pillar of the community. She had a giving spirit and often volunteered helping the homeless in her free time. Nobody predicted that the well-liked woman would be discovered murdered at her home in 2014, with her hands, ankles, and mouth bound with duct tape. The case was cold for nearly a decade until December 2023, when authorities arrested 59-year-old Lance Beaton on suspicion of Danette's death. According to police, Beaton met Danette through volunteering at a homeless shelter. Investigators looked into his possible involvement in the case after developing a new lead, and he was allegedly linked to the crime scene through DNA evidence. Law enforcement now believes that Beaton was stalking Danette before her murder and obtained a copy of her house key with plans to go inside the residence while Danette was away out of town. Beaton allegedly entered the home and killed Danette during an unexpected encounter. A friend of the victim told detectives that Danette told them that she thought someone had been going into her house when she wasn't there. She'd come home several times to find that things had moved around, suggesting that Beaton entered the home on more than one occasion leading up to the murder. It falls in line with a few allegations in a separate case that were made by Beaton's ex-girlfriend, who accused him of getting a copy of her house key and entering her house while she was away. During a search of Beaton's home after his arrest for Danette's murder, police found a pair of underwear and some adult items that had been stolen from the ex-girlfriend's home. As of 2024, the suspect remains held without bail on 1 count of open murder. Number 5. Joshua Yanuzzi. In October 2018, a woman found a cell phone hidden inside a single-stall bathroom at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. The phone was taped facing the toilet, and it was actively recording when it was found. Frightened by the discovery, the woman turned the device over to law enforcement, who traced it to a 24-year-old student named Joshua Yanuzzi. Investigators linked Yanuzzi to the crime through surveillance footage, which showed him going inside the bathroom before and after the woman who found the phone. By the time authorities moved forward with charges against Yanuzzi, they'd identified at least 20 separate victims, but they believed the actual number was likely much higher. During the questioning phase, Yanuzzi allegedly admitted to secretly filming women at the school on over 50 occasions over a 2-year period. He was also accused of targeting women he knew from his local theater community at off-campus locations in Pennsylvania and Delaware, including private homes and at least 2 theaters. Worst of all, prosecutors claimed that Yanuzzi uploaded at least one of the perverted videos online to a public forum. By the time the investigation was over, police estimated the number of victims to be about 90. In September 2019, Yanuzzi pleaded guilty to invasion of privacy, possession of obscene materials, as well as wiretap violations. He was sentenced to 3 to 23 months in prison and was required to register as a convicted predator for the rest of his life. After serving his time, Yanuzzi challenged his predator designation in court, but the requirement was upheld. Number 4. Michael Shelley Baker Jr. Imagine walking into your home and having your obsessed ex suddenly emerge from a closet while saying that they just want to talk. That's what reportedly happened to a woman in Georgia named Sylvia Norman in 2016 when she went into her Brunswick house and was surprised by the presence of her on and off boyfriend. Michael Shelley Baker Jr. already had a lengthy criminal record and was on probation for his past cases. After leaving Sylvia's closet and realizing he wasn't welcome there, he allegedly lost his temper and grabbed Sylvia by the throat before throwing her to the floor and pepper spraying her. Sylvia convinced Baker to let her leave the house, leaving her debit card with him as collateral and promising to come back. Instead, she made an immediate beeline for the nearest police station. Baker led police officers on a high-speed chase with 4 passengers in his car, including a few children. The pursuit ended when he crashed the vehicle. He was taken to the emergency room. Due to the severity of his injuries, nobody believed he would ever leave the hospital. But he walked out a few days later with multiple broken bones and caught a bus over to Sylvia's house. At that point, the decision was made to revoke Baker's probation for a past case. After being taken back into custody with 12 new charges, Baker apparently tried to contact Sylvia from jail. He was also accused of having a contraband cell phone and using it to send the victim text messages from behind bars, blaming her for his legal troubles. The case was about to go to trial in late 2017 when Sylvia failed to show up to court despite being subpoenaed for her testimony. Without her input on the stand, the prosecutor had a harder time proving the case against Baker, so they agreed to negotiate a plea deal. Baker pleaded guilty to charges related to the high-speed pursuit, including 1 felony count of fleeing to elude and misdemeanor counts of reckless driving and failure to maintain lane control. Multiple charges were dropped as part of the deal, including several counts of aggravated stalking, false imprisonment, and even transaction card theft. Baker was sentenced to 15 years in prison, including 8 years from a previous sentence that was revoked when he violated probation. But he was paroled at some point before serving out his full term, and in early 2024 he was arrested once again. Records show that he's currently being held at the Glynn County Jail on suspicion of 3 counts of aggravated battery, 1 count of robbery, 1 count of cruelty to children, and a parole violation. Number 3. Bernard Joseph McClellan. In August 2023, a 60-year-old River Falls, Wisconsin man named Bernard Joseph McClellan threatened to kill his ex-wife and her new boyfriend after seeing a Facebook post showing that they'd attended a wedding together. McClellan's ex told police officers that she and her partner were in town for the ceremony when they started receiving messages during the night of the celebration. Over a 2-hour period, McClellan allegedly sent his ex 40 separate messages, which included threats to hunt her down and kill her. The woman's boyfriend also received 44 similar messages, along with a challenge to come to the suspect's house and a threat to shoot him in the head. According to a police report, McClellan answered the door with a knife in his hands when officers paid him a visit to talk about the complaint. He initially denied contacting either victim, but eventually confessed to sending the violent messages and admitted that he wanted to beat up and shoot the boyfriend. McClellan is also accused of telling officers that nobody will be able to stop him from harming the victims once he gets out of jail, saying in his own words, "Restraining orders don't work." He went on claiming, "If I am a committed man set on a mission, you can't stop me, brother." Officers said that McClellan grew disorderly and belligerent while being taken into custody. He allegedly threw himself to the ground and blamed the officers for it, resisted being placed into a police car, challenged officers to bang his head, and hurled racial slurs at the cop who transported him to jail while threatening to chew the officer's ear off. McClellan was then charged with felony stalking, threatening harm or injury via computer message, and disorderly conduct. He was initially released on a $2,500 bond, but was hauled back to jail only 2 days later after being accused of contacting a victim's relative in violation of a restraining order. After the second incident, authorities imposed additional charges of felony bail jumping and 2 restraining order violations. Records show that McClellan is not currently in custody, leaving the status of this case unclear. Number 2. Chad Michael Bustow. In August 2023, an obsessed Drew Barrymore fan named Chad Michael Bustow rushed toward the stage shouting erratically while the 48-year-old actress was being interviewed in Manhattan. The awkward encounter was caught on camera as Bustow told Barrymore his name and insisted that he needed to see her while she was in New York City. He was quickly removed by security while Barrymore left the stage for her own safety. A quick peek at Bustow's background is enough to spark many concerns. The 43-year-old drifter has previously been arrested several times and in multiple states, including for trespassing, indecent exposure, and disorderly conduct. He has a history of strange behavior, including a handwritten lawsuit he filed back in 2023 claiming he was the rightful owner of the Hilton hotel chain. In another civil suit, Bustow tried to fight for the freedom of all criminally accused individuals in all prisons on planet Earth. He's also filed court documents that were filled with Pokemon cards and tried to sue his parents for forcing him to exist. Just a few days after his initial display of concerning behavior during Drew Barrymore's interview, Bustow was caught going door to door in an attempt to try and find her home in Southampton, Long Island. He was arrested 3 different times for stalking Barrymore during that week alone, but he walked free each time due to New York State's generous bail reform laws, which do not consider misdemeanor stalking a bailable offense. The judge ordered Bustow to wear a GPS monitoring device, but he never showed up for the scheduled fitting. A warrant was then issued for his arrest, but he continued to roam free as he looked out for his next target. About a month after his arrests for stalking Drew Barrymore, Buster was accused of trespassing into a fashion show dressing room searching for actress Emma Watson while yelling that he wanted to marry her and take a picture with the woman. As he was escorted off the property by security, he allegedly grew irate and threw a temper tantrum. In addition to the stalking charges he was already facing, Buster was charged with 2 additional counts of trespassing and 2 counts of disorderly conduct in connection with his most recent freakout. He does not seem to be in custody, indicating that he remains free amid his pending criminal case. And now for number 1. But if you want to hear more bizarre and crazy stories, stay tuned after the video for some more content. Number 1. Derek W. Brown. A Houston, Texas woman lived in fear for over a decade at the hands of an ex who refused to leave her alone even after he served prison time for stalking her. On top of targeting his former girlfriend, Derek W. Brown also stalked the woman's family members. The victim first filed charges and tried to get a restraining order against Brown back in 2011. Just 3 years later, in 2014, Brown was convicted of stalking and sentenced to serve 5 years in prison. Just days after his release in 2019, he picked up right where he left off and started tormenting his ex and her family once again. Thankfully, it wasn't long before he was arrested for these crimes. In 2023, the judge overseeing Brown's case found him guilty of another stalking charge after a bench trial. Throughout the proceedings, experts testified that as long as Brown was a free man, his victims' lives were in danger. During his sentencing hearing, prosecutor Erica Robinson Windsor begged the judge to impose a heavy sentence, pointing out that the victim did everything in her power to seek safety and protection, but nothing seemed to stop Brown. The 49-year-old serial stalker was then sentenced to serve 35 years in prison. He became eligible for parole in 2023, but is slated for release in 2034. It's possible that he could remain in prison until 2054.
9. Ben Gould. After meeting on the Plenty of Fish dating service in 2018, British couple Ben Gould and Hayley Smith started dating and eventually moved in together. The next year, Hayley found out that Ben had been living with his ex when they first met, and she pumped the brakes on what had initially seemed like a budding romance. She kicked Ben out to think things through, but he didn't exactly go away quietly. Desperate to continue their relationship, Gould stalked Smith relentlessly over the phone and in real life. He followed her, broke into her camper, and called and messaged her endlessly. Fearing for her children's safety, Hayley packed up all of their belongings and went to stay with various friends and relatives. But Ben somehow kept figuring out where they were staying and sending her pictures of whatever home she was in at the time. Hayley reported the unwanted contact and a warrant was soon issued for Ben's arrest, but police didn't find him at his listed address in Cornwall. One day, he sent Hayley a text saying he was watching her from inside her house. Police searched but couldn't find him, so they eventually left. 10 days later, officers returned and found Ben inside Hayley's attic. He pleaded guilty to stalking but managed to avoid any prison time. Hayley was granted a 3-year protection order, but said it wasn't enough considering the severe psychological trauma he put her through. 8. Ezekiel Zas. Brittany and James Campbell returned home to Honolulu with their children in 2019 after a week-long vacation and saw one of their bikes sitting outside, which was odd since they hadn't left it there before leaving. When James tried to open the front door, a man calmly pulled it shut and told him, "This is not your home." Brittany immediately called 911 while James went inside with a sledgehammer to get the intruder to leave. Police identified the suspect as 23-year-old Ezekiel Zas and charged him in connection to the home invasion. In the meantime, the Campbells found their home in a state of complete disarray. They also found a series of disturbing diary entries and videos on one of their laptops. The entries included personal details, like the family's medical information, making it clear that their unwelcome guest had been living in the house since before they even left for their trip. He left multiple knives next to the computer, along with a manifesto containing gruesome plans to perform invasive medical experiments on the family. Brittany and James started to remember strange incidents that had happened in recent months, including a webcam and other items that disappeared from the homes, doors that were unexplainably left open, and the family dog barking for what seemed like no reason at all. While sharing their story on the Lifetime series Frogging, Hide Her in My House, the couple said they weren't sure exactly how long Zas was hiding in their house. Zas was charged in an unrelated murder case after being removed from the property and is now at a state-run mental facility after being deemed incompetent for trial. At the very least, the Campbells don't have to worry about him wandering around, but they were so traumatized by his intrusion that they sold their house and started over elsewhere. 7. Extra baggage. A New Zealand family bought a trailer full of items from a storage facility auction in 2022 and got home to see a gruesome discovery. While unloading the bin, they were overcome by a putrid smell. After some digging, they found suitcases filled with human remains. The smell was so strong that neighbors also noticed it. One resident who worked at a crematorium recognized the stench as decomposing human flesh. Another thought the odor belonged to maybe a dead cat, but they never thought it would be human. Overwhelmed by the resulting media attention, the family went to stay with a relative. Sympathetic community members called on anyone with information about the remains to step forward. It was initially unclear how many bodies were inside the luggage. Authorities ultimately determined that the remains belonged to 2 young individuals who had been hidden inside the suitcases for as many as 3 to 4 years. The mother of the deceased was extradited from South Korea to New Zealand, where she now faces 2 murder charges. As of today, most of the details about the case are kept from the public. If convicted, the suspect could face life in prison, which comes with a minimum of 10 years. 6. The disappearance of George Smith IV. Newlyweds George and Jennifer Smith set out for their honeymoon in 2005 and went on a 12-day Mediterranean cruise. Sadly, George vanished after getting extremely drunk at the ship's casino one night. The next morning, an overhang beneath the balcony of the couple's cabin was found covered in blood. 4 young men George was seen hanging out with before he disappeared told authorities that they helped him get to his room because he was too drunk to get there alone. They said they put him in bed, he thanked them, and they left. Nothing else. And while their version of events has been subjected to severe scrutiny, none of them were ever formally charged. Jennifer also fell under suspicion, but was cleared of any and all wrongdoing. Authorities have since entertained many theories, including the possibility that George simply fell overboard while intoxicated. They've also considered that he might have been robbed or gotten into a disagreement that suddenly turned violent. His body was never found, and the FBI closed its investigation into the case back in 2015. In 2020, one of the men who spent time with George on the ship, Gregory Rosenberg, was executed in his driveway by an unknown assassin who's still at large. Investigators believe Rosenberg's murder may have been an ordered hit, and that it may be somehow related to George's disappearance. 5. The Girl in the Box. 20-year-old Colleen Stam was hitchhiking in Eugene, Oregon in 1977 when a young, nice-looking couple offered her a ride. They had their baby with them, so it seemed like a safe enough idea. The couple, 23-year-old Cameron Hooker and his 19-year-old wife Janice, then held a knife to Colleen's throat once she got into the car and put a heavy box over her head to block all sights and sounds. They initially kept her in their California basement, where they sadistically tortured her. When the Hooker family moved to a trailer, they kept their captive in a coffin-like box beneath their bed for nearly 23 hours a day, typically only letting her out to babysit their 2 children or for a torture session. Cameron told Colleen he was a member of a satanic cult called The Company. He convinced her that they were always watching and had placed recording devices in the home, making her fear that the organization might hurt her family if she tried escaping. Over time, Colleen gained a few privileges. 4 years into her captivity, she was allowed to visit her family by herself. When she did, her loved ones could tell something was wrong based on Colleen's withdrawn behavior and lack of communication. They suspected she'd joined a cult, but were afraid to press for details because they thought it might push her away again. Meanwhile, Colleen was scared to tell them what was happening because she thought the company would find out. In that sense, she was just as much a prisoner psychologically as she was physically. Janice eventually realized that her husband had brainwashed her as well, and in 1984 she helped Colleen escape the home. She eventually testified against Cameron in exchange for an immunity deal, helping to secure a conviction against him for kidnapping. He was later sentenced to 104 years in prison. Cameron was denied parole in 2015 and will only be eligible again in 2030. 4. University of Idaho murders. Early one morning in November 2022, 4 University of Idaho students, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, and Zana Canodal, were brutally stabbed to death in their off-campus apartment. Canodal's boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, was also killed in the bloodbath. 2 roommates who slept through the attack were unharmed and called the police when they woke up the next morning to see the carnage. The murder weapon was never found. No suspects have been named and no arrests pursued. Investigators initially said that at least one of the deceased was targeted, but the police then said that they weren't sure if it was a targeted killing or not in the first of many statement reversals they've made during this case. Law enforcement has also received a flood of tips, including speculation that one victim, Kaylee Goncalves, had a stalker before death. So far, detectives haven't verified this claim, but they haven't fully ruled it out either. They've also gone back and forth on whether they believe the public is in danger or not. The 2 surviving roommates are not suspected of being involved at all. The apparent lack of progress in solving this case has led to frustration from university students and family members, as well as allegations that police aren't doing as much as they could to get to the bottom of this tragic mystery. 3. The disappearance of Dr. Chandre Cross. Prominent Florida oncologist Dr. Chandre Cross left Naples on his 33-foot boat named the Vitamin C one afternoon in 2022 and never returned. The US Coast Guard launched a search for the 49-year-old and found his ship off Sanibel Island. But Cross was nowhere to be seen, and after covering a 13,000 square mile area, the Coast Guard suspended the search altogether. Officials urged members of the public to come forward if they knew anything about the doctor's disappearance and send condolences to his family. It's unclear whether Cross was wearing a life jacket out on the water or not. Even after the efforts to find him were called off, the Collier County Sheriff's Office confirmed that the missing persons report on him was still active in case of any updates. Records revealed that Cross's wife filed for divorce the same day he disappeared, but there's no evidence to suggest foul play. He left behind 3 children who now have to grapple with not knowing what happened to their father or where he ended up. 2. An unexplained leap. 23-year-old Charles Hughes Crooks was co-piloting a small plane over North Carolina one day in 2022 when he botched a landing attempt, forcing the plane to divert to another airport in the emergency. The pilot in command then took the controls. While en route to Raleigh-Durham International Airport, Crooks became noticeably upset, according to the pilot. He opened a window and then lowered the ramp at the back of the plane, indicating that he needed air and was perhaps just sick to his stomach. Crooks got out of his seat, removed his headset, calmly apologized to the pilot, and then fell out of the aircraft with no parachute at 3,500 feet up in the sky. Air traffic controllers were shocked by this, but they knew there was no way the young aviator could have survived a fall from that high. His remains were soon found in someone's backyard. Crooks's actions raised a lot of questions. Even though he seemed upset by the failed landing, it was a stretch to think someone in their right mind would take their life over it. An investigation discovered that he most likely didn't jump out of the plane, but that he probably just fell while leaning over to vomit from the open ramp. No drugs or alcohol were in his system at the time, and while the pilot initially reported that Crooks jumped, the findings determined that this was unlikely. 1. Bizarre family vacation. One night in October of 2022, residents in Fremont, Michigan saw an elderly woman wandering the street alone and called the police. She had left the home she shared with her daughter, 51-year-old Suzette Sirigliano, Suzette's husband, Anthony, and the couple's 2 teenage boys. The Siriglianos were not at the house though, and it was unlike them to leave Suzette's mother by herself, knowing she had dementia and needed full-time care. They also left their pets behind. At least one family member left a cell phone and they were all unreachable. Shortly before they disappeared, Anthony placed a strange 911 call, stating that he needed police protection immediately and wanted to speak with a police officer as well as US authorities. He mentioned the 9/11 attacks and said he had to discuss something of vital national interest. Anthony feared someone wanted to erase him from the face of the earth and insisted he wasn't crazy. He also made several other paranoid statements. Officers visited the family after the call and ultimately determined Anthony's questionable mental health wasn't putting him or his family at risk. He had no history of issues, and the Siriglianos were known for being an average, friendly family, making the case even more shocking. Nearly a week after vanishing, the family was found safe over 450 miles away in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. A gas station manager who saw them in Gulliver, Wisconsin, told the US Sun that one of the teens asked to use a phone but couldn't figure out how to operate it. She said that she didn't think the other members of the family knew he was trying to call someone, and she didn't know who he was trying to reach or even why. Police interviewed the family and learned that they all thought people were after them, but determined they didn't meet the required criteria for protective custody. Authorities closed the case and declined to charge the Siriglianos for leaving Suzette's mother behind after determining that they meant no actual harm. The reasons for their abrupt departure and the strange circumstances leading up to their disappearance remain unclear and foggy at best.
Thanks for watching. Have you ever been so creeped out by a neighbor that you moved, even if it wasn't a convenient time to relocate? Tell us about it in the comments below.